and a senior fellow at the Center for Strategic and International Studies and a member of the Executive Committee of the Center for Air Power Studies in New Delhi. His main areas of interest are developments in India's neighborhood and issues of economic integration, energy, and national security and terrorism. He currently writes an influential column in the Pioneer, BusinessLine, and Readiff.com, mostly on foreign affairs. He is popularly regarded as a hawk when it comes to matters of India's defense policy and policy towards Pakistan and terrorism. Sorry, on my hand. He co-authored a book with ex-Pakistan Foreign Secretary Dr. Humayun Khan. The book, Diplomatic Divide, debates the issue that divide India and Pakistan. May I have the privilege of requesting Mr. Pakistan.
आदरणीय अखिलेश भार्गव जी, आदरणीय चंद्रशेखर केतकर जी, डॉक्टर पालवेकर और देसाई जी, मैं आभारी हूँ कि आपने इस तरह मेरा स्वागत किया। मद्रास से हूँ, कोशिश करूँगा थोड़ी सी बात हिंदू में तो अंग्रेजी में बात करूँगा। आखिर में एक संक्षेप रूप से जो मैंने अंग्रेजी में कहा उसे हिंदी में भी कहूँगा, लेकिन आपको 5-10 मिनट मुझे ज़्यादा देना पड़ेगा। फिल्म्स में मेरा यहाँ आना मैं महत्वपूर्ण समझता हूँ, इसलिए कि राष्ट्रीय सुरक्षा के जो अभी टास्क फोर्स बने थी, नरेश चंद्रा टास्क फोर्स, जिसमें बॉम्बे के डॉक्टर अनिल ककोलकर भी शामिल थे, हमने पूरे राष्ट्रीय सुरक्षा की जांच की और कुछ सिफारिशें दी। और राष्ट्रीय सुरक्षा को हमने सिर्फ सेना या विदेश नीति तक सीमित नहीं रखा। ऊर्जा की समस्या, कृषि की समस्याएं, सुरक्षा जो का मतलब ये है कि आम आदमी को, आम आदमी पार्टी ने आम आदमी को सुरक्षा मिले, और इसके लिए ऊर्जा की भी जरूरत है, कृषि प्रगति की जरूरत है। तो सब पर हमने जांच किया। 18 महीने गुजर गए हैं, सरकार जाने की अभी तक उस रिपोर्ट को उन्होंने सार्वजनिक क्यों नहीं किया? शायद कुछ काम करने पड़ते। अब कई बातें हुई यहाँ। भार्गव साहब ने कहा, पहले जनरल साहब ने कहा कि कुछ 3-4 साल पहले जब भारत के में 5 महाशक्ति के नेता यहाँ पहुँचे, और फिर भार्गव साहब ने समझाया कि कैसे हमारी छवि बिगड़ गई है और कैसे हम आजकल जो समस्याएं हमारे सामने हैं और रिश्ते भी बिगड़ गए हैं हर एक के साथ। तो हुआ क्या 3-4 सालों? हम सब जानते हैं महंगाई, आर्थिक स्थिति तो बिगड़ी, लेकिन बात ये याद रखना चाहिए, अगर देश की अर्थव्यवस्था ठीक ना हो तो कोई आपका इज्जत नहीं करता। असलियत ये है आज की दुनिया में। और दूसरी बात यह है कि विदेश नीति जरूर हमने अच्छा ढांचा बनाया, लेकिन क्या हम अपने जो लोगों को विश्वास देते हैं, आश्वासन देते हैं, हम उसे पूरा करने पाते हैं? आपने श्रीलंका और बांग्लादेश का जिक्र किया, और जनरल साहब ने कहा, आए थे म्यांमार को, बर्मा को, जब मैं वहाँ था जनरल जोशी के साथ, तो हमने कई वहाँ प्रोजेक्ट बनाए थे, लेकिन 13 साल गुजर गए हैं, वो अधूरे रहे। अगर एक सड़क बनाना हो जिससे आपकी उत्तर पूर्वी क्षेत्र को सागर से मिलाना है, तो वो सिर्फ म्यांमार के जरिए कर सकते हैं। लेकिन अगर वो सड़क बनाने के लिए 1 साल के बजाय 10 साल लेते हैं, तो कौन आप पर विश्वास करेगा? यही बात है दूसरी चीज़ों की इम्प्लीमेंटेशन में। तो कुछ दिन पहले एक म्यांमार के पुराने दोस्त मुझसे मिले और उन्होंने मुझसे कहा, पार्था भाई, इज इंडिया नॉट अ मेंबर ऑफ नेटो? मैंने कहा, भाई हम नॉर्दर्न लैंड हैं, हम नेटो के मेंबर कैसे बने? इसे नहीं, वो नेटो नहीं है, नॉर्थ अटलांटिक ट्रीटी ऑर्गेनाइजेशन। मेरा कहना, आपका नेटो इज नो एक्शन टॉक ओनली। तो अगर ये हाल हो कि आप अपने दिए गए वचन को पूरा ना करें, चाहे वो श्रीलंका के राष्ट्रपति हो या एक मैत्रीपूर्ण नेता जैसे शेख हसीना बांग्लादेश में हो, तो कौन आपको इज्जत करेगा? तो चलिए, बात ये रही, अब इससे मेन सब्जेक्ट में आऊँगा। एंड आई शैल नाउ turn to Hindi and of course English and then return. We're discussing Israel, India and Iran, the three I's in this region. I think it's an appropriate subject to discuss, particularly in Bombay, because you face the West Coast. Historically, your trade has been, your connections have been with the West Coast and the western neighbors of India. That is true of the entire West Coast, extending from Kerala to Mumbai and even into Surat and Gujarat. So it is only appropriate that we deal with this here and discuss it here, because this is an issue which you must discuss the Gulf, because the states on the West Coast, you are crucial for the conduct of diplomacy in the Gulf. And just remember one thing. In those 6 Gulf Arab states, starting with Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, UAE, Kuwait, Oman, the fact is, in those 6 states, there are 6 million Indians who live. They remit back $40 billion every year. We look after our NRIs in the United States. They are very comfortable. But don't forget, the Indian economy survives because of these remittances, particularly in these days when we've messed up our economy so much that we almost faced an economic downgrade. So this region is crucial to us. And in this world, Iran fits in. I will come to how Iran fits in, but for us, and the situation now prevailing, how does Iran fit in? Iran fits in for 2 reasons. Firstly, because for years, a large amount of our oil supplies have come from there. Second, the fact of the matter is that the Iranians, you must remember, are a proud civilization. They distinctly the Iranians are a proud civilization. They regard themselves as very different from their Arabs. I mean, if we speak in respect of both the Iranians and the Arabs, but the Iranians don't exactly have entertained that feeling towards their Arab neighbors, because historically, Arabs went outwards after the coming of Islam. And Iran, historically, for centuries has looked outwards. And if you go back to their relationship with Israel, it's been a mixed one. When the Jews fled Israel, of course they went to Babylon, but a large number of them came to Iran. Yes, in 2 waves. Then there was the period of Nebuchadnezzar when they had problems in Babylon. But ultimately, it was Cyrus the Great who freed the Jews. And then, I have a problem. I go to Israel and I listen to them talking nothing but about Iran. And I said, hey, I'm not come here to discuss Iran. And I go to Tehran, they discuss nothing about how bad our relationship with Israel is. So I always keep telling my Iranian friends, listen, we don't choose your friends for you. We know precisely what you're doing with Pakistan. And don't choose our friends for us. So I think this is a factor you have to bear in mind. One, in the conduct of policy, don't let anybody else tell you who your friend should be. First make an assessment on your national interest, who's to be your friend and what you gain, and do what you think is right. Another thing is, I don't think at this point in time it's worthwhile for us to get involved in centuries-old disputes. But coming back to the Israeli-Iran connection, I mean, in the days of the Shah, the Jewish community was absolutely delighted. The Torah was respected by the Shah personally. But then came the revolutionary government. And I've often asked myself as to why the revolutionary government turned against Israel. One, of course, was the paranoia of the connection between SAVAK and the Mossad, which concerned them. The other, more importantly, was the United States became an enemy. And the third was the United States alliance with Saudi Arabia and the Arab states. And I will come to where that is at the present moment. Now, in the meantime, matters got complicated with A.Q. Khan supplying from his nuclear Walmart, as it is known, the centrifuges to Iran. The Pakistanis played it beautifully. A.Q. Khan was provided with Iran with the know-how to make nuclear weapons. And in fairness, this is the difference between Iran and its Gulf Arab neighbors. Iran had the technological ingenuity to build on what it got. And believe me, as the Shia-Sunni differences grow, I would not be surprised within the next few years if Saudi Arabia turns to Pakistan for nuclear security. These are the challenges you face in this region, because already CSS-2 missiles that Saudi Arabia have are supplied by China. Both China and Pakistan proliferate, whether it is with Saudi Arabia. When I was High Commissioner in Pakistan, Prince Sultan, I think it was then Defense Minister of Saudi Arabia, was the first foreigner, apart from the Chinese, who was granted access to the nuclear facilities of Pakistan. Of course, the Chinese were in and out. And really, and the other factor you must remember is that there is no such thing as a Pakistani nuclear weapon. There is a Chinese nuclear weapon. There are Chinese-made designed nuclear weapons in Pakistan. Pakistan's enrichment facilities were upgraded by China. And interestingly, we are still seeing and still assessing whether those things of the upgraded centrifuges were passed on from Pakistan to Iran. That is still a question mark. And but the fact of the matter is, the Iranians went about it in a very determined manner, despite every effort by the United States to stop them. But the worst is American hypocrisy. America looked the other way when Pakistan was given its nuclear weapons designs by China. And we gave them a lot of evidence, and they say, sorry, we have no evidence. Now if you see the writings, they knew that the first Pakistani nuclear weapon was tested not in 1998, but in 1990 in Xinjiang, in Chinese territory. So I think these are the realities of our immediate neighborhood. Then came Afghanistan, and this is where our relationship with Afghanistan became close. When the Taliban was backed by the ISI, even the Harkatul Mujahideen was trained in Afghan territory. The so-called jihad in Kashmir then was run from a place called Khost in southern Afghanistan, where the Harkatul Mujahideen was trained. It's a different matter, the Americans accidentally bombed them and accidentally did us a favor. That's another story. But the reality is that at that point in time, we had no presence in Afghanistan. The only presence we could have was in Mazar-e-Sharif, then under the control of Ahmad Shah Massoud and the Northern Alliance. And to reach there, we had to go through Iran. And to be honest with you, I can talk this frankly now, I wouldn't talk about it 10 years ago. The Northern Alliance and the anti-Taliban elements were sustained by an alliance of Russia, Iran, and India. And therefore, when the Americans walked in, when a new government had to be formed in Bonn, it was India which persuaded the Iranians, don't come in the way and insist on your favorites being in government. Let the Afghans decide it themselves, and we'll get the Americans to move along. So there is a role which we have played. That was during Mr. Vajpayee's time, when in Paul. So I think Iran became crucial to us at that point in time. And it remains crucial for us in many ways, because the Iranian anger with the Taliban was because the entire Shia element, the Hazaras, were being wiped out by the Taliban with Pakistani state. And that is how and bear this in mind, this Shia-Sunni factor in today's world is going to be more important to us than anything else in the Islamic world. There are going to be serious differences. And while the Iranians were very gung-ho about Israel, it's a different matter during Iran-Contra that it was through Israel that Iran got some of its weapons when it was fighting Iraqis. The reality is, in this world, there are no permanent friends and permanent enemies. Let's get this very, very straight. I'm very cynical about all this. I'm willing to talk. When I'm in Pakistan, I'm astonished to see a Madrasi narrate Urdu Shairi. But that's a different matter. Shairi is one side and relationships are another. The reality is that the Shia-Sunni differences were there to start with. Saddam Hussein was a Sunni leader who attacked Iran with American encouragement. It happened when I was in Washington, and I know that attack took place with American encouragement. And it's a different matter, the Iranians fought back, and fought back hard. So this factor has now become much more salient in the world. When the Iranians were isolated, they hit back by getting in contact with radical Arab states. They got in touch with the Syrians. They established a beachhead in Lebanon through the Hezbollah. And then George Bush did them the greatest favor. He eliminated Saddam Hussein. And Iraq became, for the first time after 150 years, the Shia majority came to rule Iraq. So George Bush did a great job for democracy in Iraq. It's a different matter that it hurt the Americans, but it changed the balance of power in the Middle East. So today, you have a Shia crescent comprising Iran, Iraq, Hezbollah, Shia minorities in Bahrain and Yemen, all together on sectarian terms. You have the Sunni majority led by Saudi Arabia, and let us not forget that the Saudis hate the Iranians so much that the Saudi king, I think it was King Fahd, told General Petraeus that America should cut off the head of the snake being Iran. Now, these are factors we have to bear in mind when we conduct policy. Whether it is towards Syria, where does Israel fit into all this? Israel naturally has concerns about the Iranian nuclear program, and because Iran is so hostile. My question is there any hostility which is permanent? I think not. The other thing is, Israel itself has around 200 nuclear weapons, and it can decimate Iran at the shortest notice. And the Iranians, as I told you, are a 2,000-year-old or are more than a 2,000 or 3,000-year-old civilization. They're not going to commit suicide, because it will amount to suicidal harakiri if they dare to attempt anything on Israel. So on the one hand, therefore, you have these shifting alliances, and then you come to the Americans. Remarkably, I'm sorry to say, people with fickle alliances. The only permanent alliance they have got, or strong alliance they've got, is with Israel. Whether you're NATO, whether you're Japan, whether you're India, is gone. But even Israel is now learning a few lessons. The lesson is as follows. You know, as the Americans say, when you say what's gone wrong, the answer is the economy is stupid. The greatest change in geopolitics which is now coming in the world is this shale revolution in America. And that is going to change the dynamics of the Middle East. Till now, the Americans and the West were dependent on oil from the Gulf. By 2018, the United States will be producing more oil than Saudi Arabia. It will be a net exporter of gas. Gas prices are already falling, though Reliance keeps demanding more and more in India. And therefore,